Ethan Carter had always been a man of charisma, someone who could walk into a room and command attention with his easy smile and polished charm. From the outside, he appeared to have it all: success, influence, and a wife who adored him. Amelia Carter was the kind of woman people admired: graceful, kind, and endlessly supportive of her husband. To the world, they were the perfect couple, the embodiment of a fairy tale marriage. But behind closed doors, cracks in the facade had begun to form, unseen by anyone but Amelia. Their marriage had started with so much promise. Ethan had swept her off her feet with grand gestures and whispered promises of forever. Amelia, an artist with a tender heart and boundless hope, had fallen deeply in love. She saw a future filled with joy and shared dreams. For years, she stood by Ethan's side, supporting his ambitious climb in the business world, often putting her own dreams on hold to help him succeed. But as Ethan's career flourished, so did his ego. The man who once held her hand and told her she was his world began to change. His late nights at the office became more frequent. Business trips that used to last a few days stretched into weeks. When he was home, he was distant, his attention buried in his phone or distracted by work. At first, Amelia convinced herself it was just the stress of his demanding career. "He's doing this for us," she told herself, clinging to the belief that the man she had married still existed beneath the growing wall between them. She tried to bridge the gap, cooking his favorite meals, planning quiet evenings at home, and even joining him at corporate events despite her discomfort with the shallow, competitive crowd. But nothing seemed to reach him. The turning point came one evening when Ethan returned home hours later than expected. His tie was loosened, and his shirt smelled faintly of perfume. Amelia's heart sank as she greeted him at the door, her smile faltering. "You're late," she said softly, her voice tinged with concern. "I told you I'd be working late," he replied curtly, brushing past her without meeting her eyes. "No, Ethan," she said, following him into the living room. You didn't call or text. I was worried." He sighed heavily, pouring himself a drink and sinking into the leather armchair. "I don't need to report my every move, Amelia. I've got enough pressure without you adding to it." The coldness in his tone stung. Amelia bit her lip, fighting back tears. This wasn't the Ethan she knew, the man who used to hold her close and make her laugh until her sides hurt. But she swallowed her hurt, determined to be patient. "I'm just trying to understand," she said quietly. "If something's wrong, we can work through it together." Ethan's expression hardened. "Not everything is about you, Amelia," he snapped. "I've got a lot on my plate. The last thing I need is to be interrogated when I walk through the door." The conversation ended there, with Amelia retreating to the bedroom, her heart heavy with confusion and sadness. She lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling and wondering where she had gone wrong. Had she failed him somehow? Was she not enough? Days turned into weeks, and Ethan's behavior grew colder. He would disappear for hours without explanation, his phone constantly buzzing with messages he refused to share. Amelia began to notice little things: receipts for expensive dinners at restaurants she'd never been to, faint lipstick stains on his shirts, and a distance in his eyes that made her feel invisible. One night, unable to bear the growing tension, she confronted him. "Ethan, I need to know the truth," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Is there someone else?" For a moment, he didn't answer. His jaw tightened, and he avoided her gaze. Finally, he let out a sigh and said, "What difference does it make?" Amelia felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under her. Tears streamed down her face as the weight of his words sank in. He didn't deny it. He didn't fight for her. He didn't care. "Ethan, how could you?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "After everything we've built, everything we've been through, how could you throw it all away?" He met her tearful eyes with a look of indifference that shattered her heart. "Because I deserve to be happy," he said simply. "And you're not what I need anymore." Those words would haunt Amelia for years to come. In that moment, she realized that the man she had loved so deeply was a stranger, someone who saw her as disposable, an obstacle to his happiness. As he walked out of the room, leaving her standing there with her tears and broken heart, Amelia knew her life would never be the same. But what she didn't know was that this betrayal was only the beginning of a pain that would push her to the edge of despair and beyond. The days that followed Ethan's confession were a blur of heartbreak and disbelief for Amelia. The life she had carefully built with him crumbled around her, leaving her standing in the ruins of their marriage. She spent countless hours staring out the window of their once cozy home, the walls now echoing with an unbearable silence. Each passing moment felt heavier than the last, a relentless reminder of the void Ethan had left behind. Ethan didn't move out immediately. Instead, he lingered, his presence in the house an excruciating reminder of the betrayal that had shattered her world. He came and went as he pleased, avoiding her gaze and treating their shared home like a hotel. Amelia tried to talk to him, to find some semblance of closure, but every attempt was met with cold indifference. One evening, as she stood in the kitchen washing dishes, she overheard him on the phone in the living room. His voice was low, but the words were unmistakable. He was talking to her, the woman he had left her for. Amelia's heart clenched as she listened to his laughter, his soft tone, the voice he used to reserve only for her. The pain was unbearable, a fresh wound reopening every time she heard his voice. When he hung up, Amelia couldn't contain her anger any longer. She stormed into the room, her hands trembling. "Do you even care how much this is destroying me?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "You're still here, Ethan. Why? Why are you doing this to me?" Ethan looked up from his phone, his expression void of emotion. "Amelia, you're making this harder than it needs to be," he said calmly, as though her anguish was an inconvenience. "I told you the truth. I'm moving on. You should too." The words felt like a slap across her face. Move on? How could she move on when her entire world had been upended? But Ethan didn't care. He had already closed the chapter of their life together, leaving her trapped in a story she no longer recognized. That night, Amelia packed a bag and left the house. She couldn't bear to stay under the same roof as Ethan any longer. She went to stay with her best friend, Claire, who welcomed her with open arms and a comforting embrace. Claire had been her rock through so many ups and downs, but even she was at a loss for words when Amelia told her what had happened. "He said I'm not what he needs anymore," Amelia whispered, her voice barely audible. "After everything, after all the sacrifices I made for him." Claire's heart broke for her friend. She sat beside Amelia on the couch, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "He's a fool," she said firmly. "And one day, he's going to realize just how much he threw away." But those words, though well-intentioned, didn't soothe the ache in Amelia's chest. She couldn't stop replaying Ethan's dismissal in her mind, his cold words cutting deeper with every repetition. She had given him everything, her love, her support, her loyalty. And in return, he had discarded her like she meant nothing. Over the next few weeks, Amelia tried to pick up the pieces of her life, but it was easier said than done. She returned to her art studio, hoping to find solace in the one thing that had always brought her joy. But every brushstroke felt hollow, her once vivid colors now muted and lifeless. Her art, like her heart, had lost its spark. To make matters worse, the whispers began. Friends, acquaintances, even strangers, all seemed to know about Ethan's new relationship. People talked behind her back, their pitying glances like daggers. The humiliation was unbearable. She couldn't step outside without feeling the weight of their judgment, the silent questions in their eyes. How could she not see this coming? One afternoon, while grocery shopping, Amelia bumped into a mutual acquaintance. The woman smiled sympathetically, her tone dripping with condescension. "I heard about Ethan," she said, her voice barely masking her curiosity. "I'm so sorry, Amelia. You must be devastated." Amelia forced a tight smile, her hands gripping the cart to steady herself. "Thank you," she said, her voice strained. "I'll be fine." But she wasn't fine. Each encounter, each reminder of Ethan's betrayal, felt like salt in a wound that refused to heal. And as if the emotional pain wasn't enough, Amelia began to struggle financially. Ethan, who had once been the provider, cut her off completely. He refused to discuss the division of their assets, leaving her to fend for herself with limited resources. Bills piled up. Debt loomed over her like a dark cloud. Amelia was forced to sell some of her artwork to make ends meet, but the market was unforgiving. She started taking odd jobs, doing whatever she could to keep her head above water. The woman who had once been the picture of grace and stability was now barely surviving, her days consumed by a relentless struggle. One evening, as she sat alone in her small apartment, the weight of everything became too much. The tears she had held back for so long finally spilled over, and she cried until her chest ached and her throat burned. She cried for the life she had lost, for the dreams that had been shattered, and for the woman she no longer recognized. But in the depths of her despair, a quiet voice within her began to stir, a voice that reminded her of who she was before Ethan, before the pain. She was more than a wife, more than a victim of betrayal. She was Amelia Carter, a woman with talent, resilience, and a heart that, though broken, still had the capacity to heal. And as the tears dried on her cheeks, a flicker of determination began to take root. Ethan had taken so much from her, but he couldn't take everything. He couldn't take her strength, her spirit, or her ability to rise above the ashes of what he had destroyed. For the first time in weeks, Amelia felt a glimmer of hope, small, fragile, but undeniable. She wasn't done yet. Her story wasn't over. And though the road ahead would be long and painful, she vowed to herself that she would find a way to reclaim her life. Not for Ethan, not for anyone else, but for the woman she was determined to become. Amelia's resolve, while fragile, was the lifeline she desperately clung to. But determination alone wasn't enough to shield her from the storm she faced. The days that followed were relentless, each one a test of her endurance. The financial strain grew heavier, the weight of Ethan's betrayal more suffocating, and the whispers of gossip louder. She felt as though the world was closing in on her, the walls tightening with every passing moment. Her small apartment, once a space of refuge, now felt like a prison. The peeling paint on the walls and the leaky faucet in the kitchen were constant reminders of how far she had fallen. Each night, she lay awake in the silence, haunted by memories of the life she had shared with Ethan. The laughter, the plans for the future, the promises they had made, it all felt like a cruel joke now, a mirage that had dissolved the moment he chose someone else. But it wasn't just the memories that tormented her. It was the sheer unfairness of it all. While she struggled to make ends meet, Ethan seemed to flourish. Social media became an unintentional source of torment, as friends shared photos of Ethan and his new partner smiling and carefree at lavish events. Their apparent happiness was a dagger to Amelia's already wounded heart. One day, as Amelia walked through the city, her mind heavy with thoughts of her mounting bills and dwindling hope, she saw them. Ethan and his new partner, laughing together as they strolled hand in hand down the street. They didn't notice her standing there, frozen in place, her breath caught in her throat. Time seemed to slow as she watched them, her emotions swirling in a tempest of pain, anger, and humiliation. It wasn't just the sight of them together that hurt, it was the ease with which he had moved on. He looked happy, unburdened, as though the years they had spent together meant nothing. Amelia turned away, her chest tight with emotion, and hurried home. But the image of them lingered, replaying in her mind like a cruel loop she couldn't escape. That night, Amelia hit her breaking point. She sat on the floor of her apartment, surrounded by unpaid bills and unfinished paintings, and let herself feel everything she had been trying to suppress. The anger, the sadness, the betrayal, it all poured out of her in gut-wrenching sobs. For hours, she cried, her tears soaking the stack of papers in front of her. When the tears finally stopped, she sat in the stillness, her body trembling from the release. In the quiet, a realization began to take shape. She couldn't keep living like this, trapped in the shadow of Ethan's choices, defined by the pain he had inflicted. She had two options: let the weight of it crush her, or find a way to rise above it. And while she didn't know how she would do it, she knew she had to choose the latter. The next morning, Amelia woke with swollen eyes and a heavy heart, but also with a faint glimmer of determination. She began her day by organizing the chaos around her. She sorted through the bills, creating a plan for what she could pay and when. She cleared her apartment of the clutter that had accumulated during her months of despair, each discarded item feeling like a small step toward reclaiming her space. But it wasn't just her apartment she needed to reclaim, it was her passion. Her art studio, once her sanctuary, had been abandoned since Ethan's betrayal. The thought of returning to it felt daunting, the memories of happier times threatening to overwhelm her. Yet, Amelia knew she couldn't let her pain steal the one thing that had always brought her joy. That afternoon, she gathered her supplies and made her way to the studio. The space was exactly as she had left it, canvases stacked against the wall, dried paint on the floor, and the faint smell of turpentine lingering in the air. She stood in the doorway, her breath catching as the weight of it all pressed down on her. For a moment, she hesitated. The doubt crept in, whispering that she wasn't strong enough, that she wasn't ready. But then she stepped inside, letting the door close behind her. She picked up a brush, her fingers trembling as they wrapped around the familiar handle, and stared at the blank canvas in front of her. The first stroke was hesitant, shaky, but it was a beginning. And as the hours passed, the canvas began to fill with color. Her pain, her anger, her heartbreak, all of it poured out of her and onto the canvas. Each stroke was a release, each layer of paint a step toward healing. For the first time in months, Amelia felt a sense of purpose, a connection to the part of herself that Ethan had tried to take away. By the end of the day, her hands were stained with paint, her body exhausted, but her spirit lighter. The canvas before her wasn't just a piece of art, it was a testament to her resilience, a reminder that she still had the power to create something beautiful, even in the midst of her pain. As Amelia left the studio that evening, the sun setting in hues of orange and pink, she felt a faint but undeniable shift within her. She was still hurting, still struggling, but for the first time, she believed that she could find her way forward. And though the road ahead was uncertain, she knew she wasn't walking it alone. She had her art, her strength, and the quiet determination to rebuild her life on her own terms. In the days that followed her return to the studio, Amelia began to rediscover herself, one brushstroke at a time. Her art became her sanctuary, a place where her pain transformed into something tangible, something she could shape and control. Each canvas told a story, of heartbreak, of resilience, of a soul fighting to mend itself. And with every piece, she felt a little stronger, as though the weight of her grief was being lifted with each layer of paint. Word of her return to the art world spread quickly. Amelia had once been known for her breathtaking pieces that captured raw human emotion, and her absence hadn't gone unnoticed. An old friend, Isabel, who owned a small but well-regarded gallery, reached out after seeing one of Amelia's new works shared online. "Amelia, your work is more powerful than ever," Isabel said over the phone, her voice filled with genuine warmth. "I want to feature your pieces in an upcoming exhibition. It's time the world sees what you've been creating." At first, Amelia hesitated. The idea of putting her pain on display for others to see felt vulnerable, almost too intimate. But Isabel's encouragement was unwavering. "Your art speaks to people, Amelia. It reminds them that beauty can come from the darkest places. Let them see that." After much thought, Amelia agreed. The weeks leading up to the exhibition were a whirlwind of preparation. She poured herself into her work, finishing pieces that spoke to the depths of her emotions. Each painting became a part of her journey, pieces of herself that she had reclaimed from the wreckage of her past. The night of the exhibition arrived, and Amelia stood in the gallery, surrounded by her creations. The room buzzed with life as people moved from one painting to the next, their hushed conversations and gasps of admiration filling the air. Amelia's heart pounded as she watched them, her vulnerability on full display. "Amelia, this is incredible," Isabel said, appearing beside her. "The emotion in your work, it's unlike anything I've ever seen. You've turned your pain into something truly transformative. Amelia smiled faintly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. I wasn't sure if I could do it, she admitted. But now, seeing all of this, it feels like I've taken a piece of my power back. Isabel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You've done more than that. You've inspired people. As the night went on, Amelia began to relax, letting the energy of the room wash over her. People approached her with words of admiration and gratitude, sharing how her art had moved them. One woman, with tears in her eyes, told Amelia that her paintings had given her hope during her own struggles. You've reminded me that it's possible to find beauty in the midst of pain, she said, her voice trembling. Amelia's heart swelled at the woman's words. For so long, she had felt like her pain was a burden, something that isolated her from the world. But now, she saw how it could connect her to others, how it could be a source of light for people who were also searching for a way through the darkness. As the exhibition came to a close, Amelia found herself standing alone in front of her favorite piece, a vibrant, abstract painting that captured the storm of emotions she had felt in the months following Ethan's betrayal. The colors swirled together in a chaotic yet harmonious dance, a visual representation of her journey. You've outdone yourself, a voice said from behind her. Amelia turned to see Isabel, a glass of champagne in her hand. This one's my favorite, she added, nodding toward the painting. It's raw, powerful, and honest. Just like you. Amelia chuckled softly, a hint of warmth returning to her smile. I wasn't sure I'd ever feel like myself again, she admitted. But tonight, I feel like I'm starting to. Isabel raised her glass in a toast. To starting over, she said, her voice filled with encouragement. Amelia clinked her glass against Isabel's, a spark of hope igniting within her. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was on solid ground, her feet firmly planted in a life she was rebuilding for herself. As the crowd began to thin and the gallery grew quieter, Amelia took a moment to reflect. She thought of how far she had come, from the nights spent crying on her apartment floor to this moment of triumph. It wasn't just the art that had saved her, it was the decision to keep moving forward, even when it felt impossible. The journey wasn't over. There were still challenges ahead, still wounds that needed healing. But Amelia knew she had the strength to face them. Her story wasn't one of defeat, it was one of resilience, of rising from the ashes and creating a life that was truly her own. And as she left the gallery that night, walking into the crisp night air, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. For the first time, she wasn't looking back at the past or fearing the future. She was simply living, and that was more than enough. Amelia's footsteps echoed softly against the cobblestone streets as she walked home from the gallery that night. The city was quiet, the soft glow of streetlights casting long shadows that danced gently with the breeze. Her heart, though still tender from the wounds of betrayal, felt lighter. The success of the exhibition had ignited something in her, a spark she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just the validation of her art, it was the realization that she could create something meaningful out of her pain. Back in her apartment, Amelia set her keys on the counter and looked around the small but cozy space. The walls, once barren and cold, were now lined with her paintings, each one a chapter in her journey. The air smelled faintly of lavender from the candles she had lit earlier, and the soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound that broke the silence. She walked over to her desk, where her sketchbook lay open. Sitting down, she traced her fingers over the edges of the paper, her mind replaying the conversations she'd had at the gallery. The woman who had cried while thanking her. The young couple who had asked to buy her favorite painting, saying it reminded them of their own struggles. Every story they shared with her had added a new layer to her understanding of what she was creating. For the first time, Amelia felt the full weight of what her art had become, not just a reflection of her pain, but a bridge connecting her to others. It wasn't about Ethan anymore. It wasn't even about the betrayal or the heartbreak. It was about finding herself in the aftermath, about showing others that it was possible to survive the unthinkable and come out stronger. That night, she picked up her pencil and began to sketch. The lines were fluid and bold, her hand moving with a confidence she hadn't felt in years. She didn't think about what she was drawing. She simply let her emotions guide her. By the time she finished, the first light of dawn was creeping through the curtains. She leaned back, staring at the image that had taken shape, a phoenix, its wings outstretched, rising from a swirling storm of ash and fire. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. The phoenix had always been a creature of transformation, of renewal. It was exactly what she felt she was becoming. In the days that followed, Amelia threw herself into her work with a renewed sense of purpose. She began to see her art not just as a personal expression, but as a way to inspire others. The gallery exhibition had been just the beginning. Isabel's encouragement stayed with her, and soon, Amelia started receiving invitations from other galleries, even inquiries from collectors who wanted to feature her work. One afternoon, while working in her studio, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from a nonprofit organization that provided art therapy for survivors of trauma and abuse. The director had attended the gallery exhibition and had been deeply moved by her story. "Your art speaks to the resilience of the human spirit," the email read. "We would be honored if you would consider collaborating with us on a project to bring healing through creativity to those who need it most." Amelia's breath caught as she read the message. The idea of using her art to help others heal resonated deeply with her. For so long, she had felt trapped in her own pain, unable to see beyond it. But now, she realized that her journey could be a source of light for others walking their own difficult paths. She replied to the email immediately, her heart racing with excitement. As she hit send, she couldn't help but smile. This was what she had been searching for, not redemption, but purpose. The collaboration quickly became one of the most fulfilling experiences of Amelia's life. She worked with survivors from all walks of life, leading workshops where they could express their emotions through art. The studio became a sanctuary, filled with laughter, tears, and moments of profound connection. Amelia shared her own story with them, not as a cautionary tale, but as a testament to the strength they all carried within them. One evening, after a particularly emotional session, a woman approached Amelia. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was a softness in her expression that hadn't been there before. "Thank you," the woman said, her voice trembling, "for showing me that it's okay to feel broken sometimes, and that it's possible to put the pieces back together in a way that's even more beautiful." Amelia felt tears well up in her own eyes. She reached out, taking the woman's hands in hers. "You're the one doing the hard work," she said gently. "I'm just here to remind you that you're not alone." As the weeks turned into months, Amelia's life began to feel fuller than she had ever imagined. The woman who had once been abandoned and broken was now a source of strength for others. Her pain had become her power, and her art had become a vessel for healing, not just for herself, but for countless others. Late one night, as she sat in her studio reflecting on everything that had led her to this moment, she realized something profound. Her life wasn't about what she had lost. It was about what she had found in the ruins, a version of herself she had never known was possible. And that version was more resilient, more compassionate, and more alive than she had ever been before. Amelia smiled as she picked up her paintbrush, ready to begin a new piece. This time it wasn't about the pain. It was about the light that had always been waiting on the other side. Amelia stood in the glow of her studio, surrounded by the vibrant, chaotic beauty of her latest works. The room was alive with color and texture, each painting a testament to the journey she had walked. She held a brush in her hand, its tip dripping with gold paint, a hue that had become her signature. To her, it symbolized resilience, the light that could still shine through the darkest of times. The piece she was working on now was unlike any she had attempted before. It was bold, raw, and deeply personal. The canvas was dominated by swirling strokes of dark blue and black, representing the storm of emotions she had once felt. But cutting through the chaos were streaks of gold and white, as though the light itself had broken through the darkness. She stepped back, studying the painting with a critical eye. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was honest. And that, she realized, was what truly mattered. As she cleaned her brushes, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Isabel. "I just heard from the director of the community center. They loved your workshop proposal. They want you to lead a series next month. Congratulations." Amelia's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and disbelief. A few months ago, she wouldn't have dared to imagine herself in this position, teaching, inspiring, creating a space for others to heal through art. Yet here she was, her pain transformed into purpose. She texted back a quick thank you and set her phone aside, her thoughts drifting to the future. The workshops would be an opportunity not just to teach, but to connect, to share her story with others who might be struggling to find their own light. She knew the importance of such moments. After all, it had been Isabel's unwavering belief in her that had started her on this path. Later that evening, as the city settled into its quiet nighttime rhythm, Amelia decided to take a walk. The crisp air was a welcome reprieve from the intensity of her work. She wandered through the streets, her mind both restless and calm, reflecting on how far she had come. Her feet carried her to an old cafe she hadn't visited in years. It was the place where she and Ethan had spent countless mornings, sharing dreams over cups of coffee. The memory of his betrayal still stung, but it no longer had the power to consume her. She stepped inside, the warmth and aroma of freshly brewed coffee wrapping around her like an old, familiar embrace. As she sat at a small corner table, she pulled out her sketchbook, letting her pencil move freely across the page. She didn't think about what she was drawing. She simply allowed her emotions to flow. By the time her coffee arrived, a delicate image of a tree had taken shape. Its branches were twisted and gnarled, yet they reached upward with a quiet strength. Tiny buds dotted the ends of the branches, a sign of life and growth. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. This tree, like herself, had endured storms, its scars visible in every line of its bark. But it had survived, and it was blooming again. As she finished her coffee, a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me, are you Amelia?" She looked up to see a young woman standing nervously by her table, holding a small canvas in her hands. Her face was framed by loose waves of dark hair, her eyes filled with a mixture of awe and hesitation. "Yes," Amelia said, smiling gently. "That's me." The woman's cheeks flushed. "I saw your exhibition last month. Your work, it spoke to me in a way I can't explain. I just wanted to thank you. It reminded me that it's okay to start over, even when it feels impossible." Amelia's heart swelled. "Thank you," she said, her voice warm. "That means more to me than you know." The woman hesitated for a moment before holding out the small canvas. "I've been working on this. It's not much, but I wanted you to see it." Amelia took the canvas, her breath catching as she studied the image. It was a simple but poignant painting of a woman standing on a cliff, her arms outstretched as the wind whipped around her. The sky was a swirling mix of gray and gold, and in the distance, the faint outline of a sunrise could be seen. "It's beautiful," Amelia said sincerely. "You have an incredible gift." The woman's eyes glistened with tears. "I never thought I could paint again after everything. But seeing your work gave me the courage to try." Amelia reached out, placing a comforting hand on the woman's arm. "Art has a way of healing us when we least expect it. Keep painting. You're stronger than you know." The encounter stayed with Amelia long after she left the cafe that night. It was a reminder of the ripple effect her journey was having, how her willingness to face her pain had opened doors for others to do the same. She realized that every person she touched, every life she inspired, was another chapter in the story she was writing, a story of resilience, hope, and the unyielding strength of the human spirit. Back in her studio, Amelia sat down at her desk, her mind buzzing with new ideas. She picked up her pencil, the weight of her past no longer a burden, but a source of inspiration. Her art had become more than a reflection of her pain. It was a celebration of her growth and the light she had found on the other side. And for the first time, she felt truly free. As the days turned into weeks, Amelia's life began to bloom in ways she hadn't anticipated. The workshop at the community center quickly became a cornerstone of her routine, a sanctuary where she and her participants could explore their pain and hope through art. Each session brought a new group of people, some timid, others desperate for an outlet, and Amelia welcomed them all with open arms. On the first day of the workshop, the room was filled with nervous energy. People shuffled in, clutching blank sketchbooks or hesitating by the door. Amelia stood at the front, her own heart fluttering with anticipation, though she masked it with a calm and welcoming demeanor. She wore a flowing white blouse splattered with faint traces of paint, her sleeves rolled up, ready to dive into the messiness of creativity. "Welcome, everyone," she said, her voice warm but steady. "Before we begin, I want you to know this isn't about creating a masterpiece. It's about exploring what's inside, your thoughts, your emotions, your truth. There's no right or wrong here, only what's real to you." A few people exchanged hesitant glances, but Amelia continued, pulling out her own sketch pad as if to say, "I'm in this with you." "Let's start with something simple," she said, handing out brushes and a tray of paint. "Close your eyes for a moment. Think about the colors that represent how you're feeling right now. Don't overthink it. Then put them on the canvas. Let it be messy, let it be imperfect, but let it be honest." As the class began to work, the tension in the room began to melt. Quiet conversations arose, and Amelia moved from table to table, offering encouragement. One older woman, Clara, sat silently at the back, staring at a blank canvas. Her hands trembled as she held the brush. "I haven't painted in years," Clara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper when Amelia approached. "I don't even know where to start." Amelia knelt beside her, gently placing a hand on Clara's. "Start where you are," she said softly. "Let whatever you're feeling guide you. The first stroke is the hardest, but once it's on the canvas, the rest will follow." Clara hesitated for a moment before dipping her brush into a deep blue paint. She stared at the canvas, then, with a shaky hand, made a single, deliberate stroke. A tear slipped down her cheek as she added another, and then another. Amelia stayed beside her, offering quiet encouragement until Clara was fully immersed in her work. By the end of the session, Clara's canvas was a sea of blue, punctuated by streaks of white and gold. She sat back, her eyes wide, as if she couldn't believe what she had created. "This," she said, her voice trembling, "this is the first time I've felt free in years." Amelia smiled, her chest swelling with a mixture of pride and empathy. "That's the power of art," she said. "It gives us a voice when words fail." Each week, Amelia watched as her students began to open up, not just on the canvas, but with each other. Stories of heartbreak, loss, and resilience emerged in quiet conversations as they painted. The room became a safe space, a cocoon of shared humanity. And through it all, Amelia felt a deepening sense of purpose. Her journey wasn't just about her healing anymore, it was about guiding others toward theirs. One evening, after a particularly moving session, Amelia stayed behind to clean up the room. As she picked up brushes and wiped down tables, Isabel arrived, carrying a bouquet of sunflowers. "These are for you," Isabel said, setting the flowers on the table. "You've been doing incredible work here, Amelia. I don't think you realize how much you're changing lives." Amelia blinked back tears, her hand resting on the flowers. "Thank you," she said softly. "But I think they're changing mine just as much." Isabel smiled knowingly. "That's the beauty of it. When we give, we receive more than we ever expected." That night, as Amelia walked home with the sunflowers in hand, she reflected on how much her life had transformed. She had been shattered by betrayal, rejection, and pain, but she had found a way to rebuild, not by erasing her scars, but by embracing them as part of her story. And now, she was helping others do the same. When she reached her apartment, she placed the sunflowers in a vase and sat at her desk, her mind teeming with ideas. She wanted to do more, create more, give more, live more. She picked up her sketch pad and began to draw, her pencil moving instinctively across the page. The image that emerged was of a phoenix, its wings spread wide, flames bursting from its body as it rose from the ashes. It was a reflection of herself, of her journey, and of the countless others she had met who were finding their own strength. And in that moment, Amelia felt a quiet certainty. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The following days brought an unexpected shift in the energy surrounding Amelia. The workshop's success had begun to draw attention beyond the community center. Local organizations reached out, curious about her methods and eager to collaborate. Yet, alongside the praise and recognition, there was an undercurrent of unease she couldn't shake, a feeling as if something was stirring beneath the surface, just out of view. One afternoon, Amelia was tidying up after a particularly emotional session when Isabel burst into the room, her face pale and her expression tense. She clutched a newspaper in one hand, her knuckles white against the paper's edge. "You need to see this," Isabel said, her voice tight with urgency. Amelia frowned, wiping her hands on her apron as she crossed the room. Isabel handed her the newspaper, and Amelia's eyes scanned the page. Her breath caught when she saw the headline, "Local Artists Workshop Gains Attention Amidst Mysterious Backlash." Her heart sank as she read on. The article praised her work, but mentioned whispers of controversy, rumors of someone from her past raising questions about her motivations and intentions. The words were vague, but they carried enough weight to feel like a blow to her chest. Amelia's hands trembled as she set the paper down. "This can't be real," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Isabel placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "I thought it might be a misunderstanding, but then," she hesitated, pulling a folded envelope from her bag. "This arrived at the community center this morning. It's addressed to you." Amelia stared at the envelope, her pulse quickening. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the edges of the paper slightly frayed, as if it had been handled roughly. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the seal, before finally opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a short, chilling message scrawled across it: "You can't escape the truth." Amelia's knees buckled, and she sank into a chair, the words blurring as tears filled her eyes. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Who had sent this? What truth were they talking about? Memories of her past, of betrayal, of pain, of the person she had been before, flooded her thoughts, threatening to pull her back into the darkness she had worked so hard to escape. "I don't understand," Amelia said, her voice cracking as she looked up at Isabel. "Why now? Who would do this?" Isabel's jaw tightened, her expression hardening. "I don't know, but we'll figure it out. You've built something beautiful here, Amelia. You've helped so many people. Whoever this is, they're trying to tear you down because they can't stand to see you rise." Despite Isabel's reassurance, the note lingered in Amelia's mind like a storm cloud. Over the next few days, the tension only grew. She began to notice small, unsettling changes, an unfamiliar face lingering outside the community center, a series of anonymous phone calls to her personal number, a shadow flickering just beyond her line of sight as she walked home at night. Amelia tried to push forward, pouring her energy into the workshop and the people she had grown to care for. But the whispers of doubt began to creep in. What if her past was catching up with her? What if everything she had worked for was at risk of being destroyed? One evening, as she prepared for bed, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a number she didn't recognize. Her stomach churned as she debated whether to answer, her hand hovering over the device. Finally, she picked it up and pressed it to her ear. "Hello," she said, her voice wary. There was a long pause on the other end before a low, gravelly voice spoke. "You thought you could just move on, didn't you?" Amelia's blood ran cold. "Who is this?" The voice chuckled darkly. "You know who I am. And you know why this isn't over." The line went dead, leaving Amelia clutching the phone with trembling hands. She stared into the darkness of her room, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of her past, the shadows she had fought so hard to leave behind, seemed to close in around her. She couldn't escape the question that now consumed her. What have I done to deserve this? And how will I ever make it stop? That night, sleep eluded her. Amelia lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. She had rebuilt her life from the ground up, but now it felt as if the foundation was crumbling beneath her. And as much as she tried to hold on to hope, an ominous feeling settled deep in her chest, a sense that the storm was far from over. The following morning, Amelia awoke with a start, her body drenched in sweat. The echo of the ominous voice from the call still rang in her ears. She tried to steady her breathing, but the weight of dread pressed heavily on her chest. The sunlight streaming through her window did little to comfort her. Instead, it felt like a cruel spotlight on her growing vulnerability. At the community center, the air was abuzz with activity, yet Amelia felt detached from it all. Her usual warmth and ease were replaced with a forced smile and distracted nods. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, a pair of unseen eyes following her every move. Every sound, a door creaking, a phone ringing, the shuffle of footsteps, sent a jolt of fear through her. Isabel noticed. "You're not yourself today," she said gently, pulling Amelia aside during a quiet moment. "Did something else happen?" Amelia hesitated, torn between sharing her fear and protecting Isabel from the storm brewing around her. Finally, she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think whoever sent the note, they called me last night." Isabel's expression hardened, her protective instincts kicking in. "What did they say?" Amelia shook her head, her eyes glistening. "Nothing that made sense. Just threats, reminders of things I thought I'd buried." Before Isabel could respond, a loud knock echoed from the front entrance of the community center. The sound was sharp, deliberate, cutting through the air like a blade. Amelia and Isabel exchanged a glance, unease pooling between them. Isabel moved toward the door, but Amelia grabbed her arm. "Let me," Amelia said, her voice steady despite the fear swirling inside her. She approached the door slowly, her pulse pounding in her ears. Through the frosted glass, she could make out the silhouette of a tall figure, standing unnervingly still. Taking a deep breath, she unlocked the door and opened it. A man stood on the threshold, his face partially obscured by the brim of a hat. His sharp, calculating eyes scanned her face, lingering just long enough to unsettle her. He was dressed too formally for the setting, his dark suit immaculate, his posture rigid. "Amelia Torres?" he asked, his voice smooth but with an edge that made her skin crawl. "Yes," she replied, her throat dry. He reached into his coat pocket, and for a moment, her heart leapt into her throat. But he pulled out a crisp envelope and handed it to her. "This is for you. I trust you'll understand its importance." Before she could ask who he was or what this was about, he turned and walked away, his steps eerily precise. Amelia stood frozen in the doorway, the envelope heavy in her hand, as if it carried the weight of her past. Isabel rushed to her side. "What is it?" she asked, her voice urgent. "I don't know," Amelia murmured, her fingers trembling as she tore open the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, the handwriting elegant yet menacing. "You've run long enough. It's time to face the truth." Amelia's breath hitched. Her vision blurred as memories she had locked away began to resurface. The mistakes, the betrayals, the part of her life she had desperately tried to leave behind. She crumpled the note in her hand, her body trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "Who is doing this to you?" Isabel demanded, her voice rising. "You need to tell me what's going on, Amelia. I can't help you if you keep shutting me out." Amelia looked at Isabel, her eyes pleading. "It's not safe for you to know. Whoever this is, they're dangerous." But Isabel wasn't deterred. "You've helped so many people, Amelia. Let us help you now." The sincerity in Isabel's voice struck a chord, but Amelia couldn't bring herself to share the full truth. Not yet. She needed to figure out who was behind this and why they had chosen this moment to resurface. More importantly, she needed to protect the people she cared about from the shadows of her past. That night, Amelia sat alone in her apartment, the crumpled note on the table in front of her. She stared at it, her mind racing. Whoever was behind this knew too much, things that no one outside her past life could possibly know. She thought about the man at the door, his unnerving presence, and the ominous words he had delivered. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Amelia made a decision. She couldn't keep running. If her past had finally caught up with her, she would have to face it. But not on their terms. If they thought they could corner her, they had underestimated her resilience. With trembling hands, she picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "It's me," Amelia said, her voice steady despite the storm raging within her. "I need your help. And I need it now." The voice on the other end of a line paused, heavy with recognition. "Amelia?" the man asked, his tone a mixture of disbelief and caution. "It's been years." "I know," Amelia replied, her words trembling but resolute. "And I wouldn't be calling if it weren't serious. Someone's found me. They're threatening me, pulling things from my past I thought were buried. I need your help." There was a long silence, the weight of unspoken history hanging between them. Finally, the man sighed. "I warned you this might happen. You knew you couldn't outrun it forever." Amelia's grip on the phone tightened, her nails digging into her palm. "I didn't call for an I told you so. I called because I don't know who else to trust." His tone softened slightly, though it still carried an edge of wariness. "Where are you?" "I'll come to you." Amelia hesitated, glancing around her dimly lit apartment. She had always prided herself on being cautious, never staying in one place too long, never giving anyone a chance to get close enough to uncover her secrets. But now, the walls that had once protected her felt like a cage. "I'll text you the address," she said finally. "But I need you to promise me something." "What?" the man asked. "Don't involve anyone else. If this spirals out of control, I don't want anyone else to get hurt." His sigh was audible through the phone. "You haven't changed. Still trying to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders?" Amelia didn't respond. She ended the call, her heart pounding in her chest. She sent the address and then sat back, staring at the phone in her hand as if it might explode. Reaching out to him was a gamble, a crack in the armor she had spent years building. But what choice did she have? If the people chasing her were who she suspected, she couldn't face them alone. The knock at her door came an hour later, sharp and deliberate. Amelia peered through the peephole, her breath catching at the sight of the man standing on the other side. His face was older, wearier, but the intensity in his eyes was unmistakable. She opened the door slowly, the chain still latched. "You came," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course I did," he replied, his tone matter-of-fact. "Now let me in before someone sees me standing out here." Amelia unlatched the chain and stepped aside, allowing him to enter. He moved with purpose, scanning the room as if assessing it for threats. Once satisfied, he turned to face her. "Start from the beginning," he said, crossing his arms. "Who's after you?" Amelia hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I don't know. Not exactly. But they know things no one should know. About the trial. About what happened that night." His expression darkened, his jaw tightening. "If they know about the trial, it means they're connected. Either to the people we took down, or the ones we couldn't reach." "That's what I'm afraid of," Amelia admitted, her voice shaking. "I thought leaving it all behind would keep me safe. I changed everything, my name, my life, the way I lived. How do they find me?" The man ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "People like them don't stop. Not until they've erased every loose end. And if they've tracked you down, they won't stop at threats. They'll escalate." Amelia felt a chill run down her spine. "What do I do?" He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "First, you stay calm. Second, we figure out who's behind this and what they want. And third," he hesitated, his expression softening, "you need to be ready for whatever comes next. This isn't just about your past anymore. It's about survival." The words hung heavy in the air, their gravity settling into Amelia's chest like a stone. She wanted to believe she could face this, that she could outsmart whoever was hunting her. But the truth was, she had never felt more vulnerable. As they sat down to piece together the fragments of her fear, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away. Every moment brought her closer to a confrontation she wasn't sure she could survive. And as much as she hated to admit it, she couldn't help but wonder if calling him had been a mistake, a gamble that might cost them both everything. Amelia sat at the small table, her hands trembling as she clutched a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Across from her, Marcus leaned forward, his sharp eyes fixed on the scattered papers and notes she'd hastily assembled. The soft glow of the single lamp in the room cast long shadows, creating an atmosphere thick with tension. Marcus picked up a photograph from the pile, a grainy image of a man in a suit, his face partially obscured by shadows. "This him?" Marcus asked, his voice low and serious. Amelia nodded, her throat tightening. "He's the one who sent the first message. It wasn't direct, just a note slipped under my door. No name, no details, but I recognized him from the trial. He was in the courtroom. Marcus?" Marcus's jaw clenched, and he tossed the photograph onto the table. "That means he's not working alone. If someone like him is coming after you, he's the front man. The real threat is still hidden." Amelia's voice broke as she spoke. "Why now? It's been years, Marcus. Why would they come after me now?" Marcus leaned back, his fingers steepled under his chin. "Maybe you stayed hidden for a while, but something changed. They wouldn't waste resources unless they thought you were a liability. You said they know about the trial. What else do they know?" Amelia's gaze dropped to the table, her voice barely a whisper. "They mentioned the night of the accident." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's eyes locked onto hers, his expression unreadable. "Amelia," he said carefully, "what exactly did they say?" She hesitated, her chest tightening as she replayed the words she had tried to forget. "They said I wasn't as innocent as I pretended to be. That I've been keeping secrets, too." Marcus's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. "Did you?" Her breath hitched as 1,000 memories collided in her mind. The accident, the chaos, the lies that had followed. She shook her head, her voice trembling. I didn't do what they think. But there are things I never told anyone, not even you." Marcus's eyes narrowed, and his voice turned colder. "Like what?" Amelia hesitated, the weight of her confession pressing down on her. "The night of the accident I saw something. Something I shouldn't have. I thought if I stayed quiet, I could leave it all behind. But now they know I was there. They know I saw it." "What did you see, Amelia?" Marcus demanded, his voice rising slightly. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced herself to speak. "I saw who gave the order. The man everyone thought was untouchable. I saw him, Marcus. He wasn't just there, he orchestrated everything." Marcus froze, his body rigid as her words sank in. "And you've been sitting on this for years? Do you have any idea what kind of danger you're in?" "I didn't think anyone would believe me," she shot back, her voice breaking. "And even if they did, what good would it have done? He had power, influence. People like him don't go down without taking everyone else with them." Marcus stood abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal. "And now they're coming for you, because you know too much. Because they're scared you'll talk." Amelia watched him, her heart pounding. "What do we do?" He stopped and turned to face her, his expression grim. "First, we figure out how deep this goes. If they're watching you, they'll be watching me now, too. We need to stay one step ahead." "And then?" she asked, her voice small. Marcus hesitated, his jaw tightening. "And then we fight back. But you need to tell me everything, Amelia. No more secrets. If we're going to get through this, I need the full story." Amelia nodded, her hands shaking as she began to recount the events of that fateful night. With each word, the walls around her carefully constructed life seemed to crumble, exposing the truth she had fought so hard to bury. And as Marcus listened, his expression darkening with every detail, Amelia couldn't help but feel that their battle was only just beginning. Somewhere outside, in the quiet of the night, a shadow moved. The figure lingered briefly under the street lamp before disappearing into the darkness, leaving only the faint echo of footsteps behind. Amelia and Marcus had no idea that their time was running out, and that the game they were playing had far higher stakes than either of them could imagine. The night stretched on, each passing hour pressing heavier on Amelia and Marcus as they worked in tense silence. The small apartment seemed to shrink with every revelation, the walls closing in like a vice. Papers were scattered across the table, a chaotic map of names, dates, and connections that hinted at the web of corruption they had barely begun to untangle. Amelia sat with her arms wrapped around herself, her gaze fixed on a single name circled in red at the center of the page. "How did I not see it before?" she whispered, her voice hollow. "He was right there the whole time, Marcus. Smiling, shaking hands, acting like he was one of us. That's how men like him operate," Marcus said grimly, his fingers drumming on the edge of the table. "They hide in plain sight, counting on the fact that no one will question them. And if someone does—" He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "They disappear," Amelia finished, her voice barely audible. She shivered, her mind racing with the implications. "That's what's going to happen to me, isn't it? I'm next." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "Not if I have anything to say about it. We're not going to let them win, Amelia. But you need to trust me." She hesitated, the weight of her fear and doubt pulling her under. "I do," she said finally, though the words felt fragile, like they might shatter under the slightest pressure. "But what if it's not enough? What if we're too late?" "We're not too late," Marcus said firmly, though the shadow in his eyes betrayed his own doubts. "We still have time to turn this around. We just need leverage, something they can't ignore or bury." Amelia glanced at the file they had assembled, her fingers brushing over the edge. "What about this?" "It's not everything, but it's a start." Marcus shook his head. "It's not enough. If we're going to take him down, we need proof that ties him directly to the order you witnessed. Something irrefutable." Amelia's stomach twisted as she thought back to that night, the vivid memory of the man in the shadows, his voice calm and cold as he sealed her fate without even knowing it. "There might be something," she said slowly, her eyes narrowing as the memory sharpened. "There was a recording. I remember seeing him with a phone, holding it up like he was documenting everything. He was too confident, Marcus. He thought he was untouchable." Marcus straightened, his expression shifting from grim determination to a flicker of hope. "If that recording exists, it's the key. We need to find it." "But how?" Amelia asked, her voice tinged with desperation. "If he has it, it's locked away somewhere no one can reach." "Maybe not," Marcus said, his mind already racing. "People like him are careful, but they're also arrogant. He might have kept a copy somewhere, thinking no one would dare to look for it." The room fell silent as they both considered the impossible task ahead. Amelia stared at the scattered papers, her heart pounding in her chest. "If we do this, if we find it, what then? How do we make sure it sees the light of day?" Marcus's gaze hardened. "We'll figure it out when we get there. For now, we focus on one thing, finding that recording. It's our only chance." As the clock ticked closer to dawn, a faint noise outside the window caught Amelia's attention. She froze, her breath hitching as the sound repeated, a soft scrape, like metal against stone. Marcus noticed her reaction and immediately moved to the window, his hand resting on the gun holstered at his side. "What is it?" Amelia whispered, her voice trembling. Marcus peered into the darkness, his eyes scanning the street below. For a moment, there was nothing, just the stillness of the city at night. Then, a shadow shifted near the lamppost across the street. Marcus tensed, his body coiled like a spring. "Someone's watching," he murmured, his voice low and controlled. "Stay here." "Marcus, don't," Amelia began, but he was already moving, his step silent as he slipped out the door. She waited, her hands gripping the edge of the table as the seconds stretched into agonizing minutes. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the pounding of her heart. When the door finally opened again, she jumped, her eyes wide with fear. Marcus stepped inside, his expression grim. "They're gone," he said. "But they wanted us to know they were here. This isn't a game anymore, Amelia. They're closing in." Her chest tightened as a wave of dread washed over her. "What do we do now?" Marcus's jaw set, his eyes blazing with determination. We move fast. If we don't, we might not get another chance. Amelia's hands trembled as she packed a small bag, stuffing it with essentials, a few changes of clothes, her notebook filled with sketches of their findings, and the USB drive containing every piece of evidence they had managed to compile. Her breaths came in shallow gasps, the weight of their situation pressing down on her chest like a crushing force. Marcus paced the room, his every movement tense and deliberate. His phone was pressed to his ear as he muttered instructions to a contact, his voice low and clipped. Amelia could barely make out the words, but the urgency was unmistakable. They didn't have much time. "They'll hit the apartment first," Marcus said after ending the call. His tone was calm, but his eyes betrayed the storm brewing inside him. "We need to be out of here before sunrise. I've arranged a safe house, but it's temporary." Amelia zipped the bag shut and looked up at him. "How temporary?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Long enough to regroup," he said, avoiding her gaze. "But we'll have to move again once they figure out where we've gone." The words settled heavily in the air. Amelia felt like a cornered animal, every instinct screaming at her to run, to hide, but there was nowhere safe. Nowhere they wouldn't find her. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her spiraling thoughts. "We're not giving up, Amelia," he said firmly. "We've come too far. They want us to feel trapped, to lose hope, but we still have options. We still have a chance." She nodded, swallowing hard. "The recording," she said, her voice trembling. "If we can get it, if we can prove everything, they won't be able to silence us." "That's the plan," Marcus replied, his eyes dark with determination. "But we need to be smart. They'll anticipate our moves, so we have to stay one step ahead." A knock at the door froze them both in place. The sound was soft, almost tentative, but it sent a jolt of fear through Amelia's body. She instinctively backed away, her hand clutching the strap of her bag as Marcus motioned for her to stay quiet. He approached the door silently, his movements fluid and practiced. His gun was already in his hand, his finger hovering near the trigger. The knock came again, a little louder this time, followed by a voice. "Marcus? It's me." Amelia's heart skipped a beat. The voice was familiar, someone from Marcus's past, perhaps, though she couldn't place it. Marcus's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing as he glanced through the peephole. He lowered his gun slightly, but the tension in his posture didn't ease. "Who sent you?" Marcus demanded through the door, his voice sharp. "No one sent me," the voice replied. "I heard you were in trouble, and I came to help." "Let me in, Marcus. We don't have much time." Amelia watched as Marcus hesitated, his fingers tightening around the doorknob. "How do I know you're not leading them straight to us?" The voice softened, carrying a note of urgency. "Because if I was working for them, you'd already be dead. Now open the door, before we all lose our chance." After a long, agonizing pause, Marcus unlocked the door and opened it just enough to reveal a tall figure cloaked in shadows. The man stepped inside quickly, shutting the door behind him. His face came into view, a mix of exhaustion and resolve etched into his features. "Who is he?" Amelia asked, her voice trembling as she stared at the stranger. "I'm the reason you're still alive," the man said, his gaze locking onto hers. "And if you want to stay that way, you're going to have to trust me." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. Marcus exchanged a wary glance with Amelia, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The stranger took a step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They know more than you think. They're closing in faster than you realize. If you want to survive, we need to act now." Amelia's chest tightened, her mind racing with questions and doubts. "How do you know so much?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man hesitated, his expression unreadable. "Because I used to be one of them." The room felt like it had been stripped of air, the weight of the stranger's confession pressing down on Amelia and Marcus like a suffocating fog. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest as she took a small step back, her mind screaming with questions. You worked for them?" she stammered, her voice laced with disbelief and fear. Her grip on the bag tightened as if it were her only anchor in the storm. The man's eyes flicked to hers, steady and unflinching. "I did," he admitted. "But not anymore. That's why I'm here. To make things right." Make things right. Marcus's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. He stepped closer to the man, his jaw clenched, his hand still hovering near his weapon. "How the hell are we supposed to trust you? For all we know, you're here to finish what they started." The man raised his hands slowly, a gesture of surrender. "You don't have to trust me," he said evenly. "But if you want to survive, you don't have a choice. They're not just after you, they're after what you know, what you have. And they won't stop until it's buried with you." Amelia's breath hitched. The room swayed slightly as the weight of his words settled over her. "Why now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why are you helping us now, after everything?" The man hesitated, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "Because I saw what they did. To you, to others. I couldn't be a part of it anymore. And because—" he paused, his voice faltering for the first time. "Because if they win, no one is safe, not you, not anyone." Marcus's eyes narrowed, his suspicion unwavering. "Convenient story," he said coldly. "But we've heard enough lies to last a lifetime. Why should we believe you?" The man reached into his jacket pocket slowly, his movements deliberate. Marcus tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun, but the man stopped, holding up a slim, silver device, a flash drive. "This," he said, his voice low and urgent, "is everything. Names, locations, operations. Proof of what they've done, what they're planning. It's the key to bringing them down." Amelia stared at the drive, her heart pounding in her ears. "Why give it to us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because you're the only ones who can use it," he said. "You're already in their crosshairs. This is your chance to fight back." Marcus snatched the drive from his hand, his eyes scanning the man with cold calculation. "If this is some kind of setup—" "It's not," the man interrupted firmly. "But you don't have long. They're tracking me, and if we stay here much longer, they'll find us all." Amelia's knees felt weak as she glanced at Marcus, searching his face for answers, for reassurance, for anything to ground her in the chaos. "What do we do?" she whispered. Marcus's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking between the man and the drive in his hand. After a long, tense moment, he exhaled sharply. "We move," he said, his voice grim. "But if you're lying to us—" "I'm not," the man cut in. "And if you want to stay alive, you'll follow me. Now." Without waiting for a response, he turned and opened the door a crack, peering into the hallway. "It's clear," he muttered. "For now." Marcus grabbed Amelia's hand, his grip firm but not unkind. "Let's go," he said, his voice low but urgent. As they followed the man into the dark, silent hallway, Amelia's mind raced with fear and uncertainty. The flash drive burned like a live wire in Marcus's pocket, a dangerous secret they were now carrying into the unknown. Each step felt like a gamble, every shadow a potential threat. And as the night closed in around them, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger wasn't the only one with secrets left to reveal. The corridor stretched endlessly before them, dimly lit and suffocatingly silent. Each step echoed against the walls, a reminder of how exposed they were. Amelia clutched Marcus's arm tightly, her breath shallow as she scanned the shadows for movement. The man leading them moved with a quiet urgency, his posture tense, his eyes darting toward every corner as if expecting danger to spring from the darkness. "Where are we going?" Marcus hissed, his voice low but sharp. His fingers grazed the gun at his hip, his mistrust evident in every step. "There's a service exit at the end of this hall," the man replied, his tone clipped. "It's not monitored. We'll have a better chance of getting out undetected." Amelia's heart pounded as they turned a corner. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive, as if the building itself was conspiring against them. She glanced at Marcus, searching his face for reassurance, but his expression was as grim and uncertain as her own. They approached a rusted metal door, its paint peeling and its hinges squeaking faintly as the man pushed it open. Beyond it lay a narrow stairwell, dimly illuminated by a flickering bulb. The air smelled of damp concrete and rust, a stark contrast to the sterile corridors they had just left. "Down here," the man said, gesturing for them to follow. Marcus hesitated, his body tense, before nodding for Amelia to move ahead. "Stay close," he murmured, his hand brushing hers in a silent gesture of comfort. The stairs seemed to stretch endlessly downward, the shadows growing deeper with every step. Amelia's breaths came faster, her grip tightening on the handrail. "How do we know this isn't a trap?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The man paused, turning to face them. His eyes, though weary, held a strange mix of resolve and desperation. "If I wanted you dead, I wouldn't have given you that drive," he said, his voice low but firm. "You have to trust me. We're running out of time." Marcus's jaw clenched, but he motioned for the man to keep moving. As they descended further, a faint sound reached Amelia's ears, a distant hum, growing louder with each step. She couldn't tell if it was machinery or something far more sinister. "What's that noise?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The man didn't answer immediately. His face darkened, and his pace quickened. "We need to hurry," he said, his tone tense. Panic clawed at Amelia's chest. Every instinct screamed that they were walking into something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. She exchanged a glance with Marcus, her fear mirrored in his eyes. Finally, they reached the bottom of the stairs, emerging into a vast, dimly lit room. The hum was deafening now, the source obscured by towering stacks of crates and machinery. Red lights blinked in the shadows, casting eerie glows across the floor. "What is this place?" Marcus demanded, his voice cutting through the noise. The man didn't answer. Instead, he crouched low, motioning for them to do the same. "Stay quiet," he whispered. "We're not alone." Amelia's blood ran cold. She strained her ears, trying to separate the hum from the faintest sound of movement. Her eyes darted around the room, her pulse racing. In the distance, a shadow shifted, too deliberate to be an illusion. Marcus pulled her closer, his hand steady on his weapon. "If this is your idea of keeping us safe," he hissed at the man, "you're doing a terrible job." The man's expression hardened. "Do you want to get out alive or not?" he snapped, his voice a low growl. Before Marcus could respond, a deafening crash echoed through the room, followed by the sound of rapid footsteps. The shadows seemed to close in around them, the blinking red lights casting frantic patterns across the walls. Amelia's breath caught as she realized they were surrounded. Amelia's heart thundered in her chest as the footsteps drew closer, their cadence unrelenting and deliberate. The shadows danced erratically in the dim red light, creating grotesque shapes that seemed alive. She clung to Marcus, her nails digging into his arm as if her grip alone could keep them grounded amidst the chaos. Marcus scanned the room, his weapon drawn but his breathing steady. "Show yourself," he barked into the darkness, his voice slicing through the oppressive hum. But the only response was silence, an unbearable, suffocating silence. The man who had guided them crouched low, his eyes darting between the approaching shadows and the exit just beyond the maze of machinery. "We have to move. Now," he hissed, barely audible above the hum that seemed to grow louder, more menacing. Marcus shook his head, his gaze locked on the shifting forms. "Not until I know what we're up against." "Marcus," Amelia's voice broke, her fear palpable. "Please." The man's frustration boiled over. "If we stay here, we're dead. They already know where we are." He gestured sharply toward the exit, his urgency undeniable. But before anyone could move, the shadows coalesced into a figure, a tall, imposing silhouette that emerged from the darkness with unnerving calm. Its presence filled the room with a weight that pressed on Amelia's chest, making it hard to breathe. "Who's there?" Marcus demanded, his voice edged with both anger and fear. His grip on his weapon tightened, his finger hovering over the trigger. The figure stepped forward, the light catching their face just enough to reveal cold, calculating eyes. Their voice, when it came, was low and deliberate, each word laced with quiet menace. "You've been playing a dangerous game, and you've brought her into it," they said, their gaze flicking briefly to Amelia. Amelia's knees threatened to give out as the figure's eyes bore into hers. There was something disturbingly familiar about them, a flicker of recognition that she couldn't place, but that sent a chill down her spine. Marcus stepped protectively in front of her, his body tense and ready. "If you're here for a fight, you've got one." The figure's lips curled into a faint, unsettling smile. "A fight?
No.
I'm here for the truth." The room seemed to hold its breath as the figure raised a hand, revealing a small, sleek device that glowed faintly in the dim light. "You want to know what's on that drive you're so desperate to protect? Let me show you." The man who had guided them froze, his face a mask of dread. "No," he said sharply, stepping forward. "They don't need to see that." "It's too late," the figure interrupted, their tone final. With a press of a button, the device emitted a projection into the air, a swirling mass of light and data that slowly coalesced into an image. Amelia's breath caught as the projection stabilized, revealing a scene that made her stomach churn. A room, sterile and cold, filled with monitors displaying feeds of people, dozens of them, their faces filled with fear and confusion. And among them, unmistakably, was her own. She stumbled backward, her vision blurring as the weight of realization crashed over her. That's me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus turned to her, his confusion mirroring her own. "What the hell is this?" The figure stepped closer, their voice calm but unrelenting. "The truth, Amelia. The truth you were never meant to find out." Amelia's world spun as the projection shifted, revealing more files, experiments, and a name that sent a jolt of electricity through her veins. "Project Echo." "What is this?" she demanded, her voice rising in desperation. Her hands trembled as she reached for Marcus, needing something to anchor her in the storm of revelations. "What did you do to me?" The figure tilted their head, their gaze unwavering. "I didn't do anything, Amelia. But the people who made you, they did." The room descended into chaos. Marcus shouted questions, the man who had guided them cursed under his breath, and Amelia felt her knees buckle as the weight of those words threatened to crush her. But the figure remained still, watching her with an eerie calm, as if waiting for her to connect the final, damning pieces of the puzzle. Amelia's breath came in short, ragged gasps as the room seemed to shrink around her. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "The people who made you," they echoed in her mind, twisting and distorting until they were all she could hear. "I'm not made," she whispered, shaking her head violently as if the denial alone could erase the projection before her. "I'm a person. I have memories. I have a life." The figure's expression didn't waver.
Do you?
"Or do you have fragments, carefully placed and curated? Shadows of someone else's truth, stitched together to keep you compliant?" Marcus stepped forward, his gun still raised but his grip faltering. "You're lying," he growled, his voice shaking. "Amelia's real. She's real. You're just trying to mess with her head." "Am I?" The figure gestured toward the projection, which now shifted to display pages of documents, charts, and logs filled with data that looked both scientific and clinical. "Do you even know who you've been protecting, Marcus? Or why they've been hunting you?" Amelia turned to Marcus, her eyes wide and searching. "Marcus, tell me you know the truth. Tell me this isn't." Her voice cracked, the words catching in her throat as tears blurred her vision. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what this is." The guide, who had remained silent, suddenly grabbed Amelia's arm, his grip firm and urgent. "We need to go.
Right now."
This is bigger than anything you can imagine." She wrenched her arm free, spinning to face him.
"No."
"Not until I know the truth. No more running." The guide hesitated, his eyes darting toward the figure. "If you stay here, you'll regret it, Amelia. Trust me. Some truths aren't worth knowing." The figure took a step closer, the glow from the projection casting an eerie light on their face. "You can keep running, Amelia. or you can face what you are. But the clock is ticking, and the people who really know the answers won't wait much longer. Stop talking in riddles. Amelia screamed, her voice breaking with desperation. If you know something, just tell me.
Who am I?
What is Project Echo? The figure's smile was thin and cold. You already know deep down. You've felt it your entire life. The gaps. The inconsistencies. The moments that didn't add up. You're not here by accident, Amelia. You're here because someone put you here. The room was silent except for the hum of the projection, which now displayed an image that made Amelia's knees buckle. It was a file, stamped with the words subject, Amelia in bold, unyielding letters. Below it was a list of dates, locations, and coded notes that meant nothing to her, but the photograph attached was unmistakable. It was her, younger, wearing a hospital gown, staring blankly at a camera as if the spark of life had been stripped away. No, she choked out, stumbling backward. No, that's not me. That can't be me. The figure tilted their head, watching her unravel. You wanted the truth. There it is. Marcus reached out to steady her, his face pale and etched with disbelief. Amelia, don't listen to them. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together. But Amelia pulled away, her mind spiraling as the pieces of her life began to fall apart. Memories she once clung to with certainty now felt hollow, artificial. Flashes of moments, her childhood, her family, her sense of self, all felt like someone else's story, written for her benefit. She turned to the figure, her tears streaking down her face. Why me? Why did they do this to me? The figure's voice softened, but their words were no less cutting. Because you were special. Because you were the key to something far greater than yourself.
But now?
You're just another loose end. Before anyone could react, the projection flickered and went dark, plunging the room into shadow. A sharp, mechanical click echoed, followed by the unmistakable sound of a door locking from the outside. They're coming, the guide hissed, grabbing Marcus by the arm. We don't have time. Move. Amelia stood frozen, her mind a battlefield of denial and acceptance, of hope and despair. But as the sound of boots echoed in the distance, growing louder with every second, one thought broke through the chaos. If she didn't act now, she might never learn the truth. The sound of approaching boots grew louder, relentless, like the pounding of a war drum echoing through the walls. Amelia's breathing quickened as panic threatened to overtake her. Her legs felt rooted to the ground, every fiber of her being screaming at her to move, but her mind remained trapped in a whirlwind of questions she couldn't answer. Marcus grabbed her shoulders, his voice urgent but gentle. Amelia, listen to me. We don't have time for this. Whatever that file says, whatever you think it means, we'll figure it out. But not if we die here. His words barely registered as she stared at the image of herself on the now blank screen. The phantom remnants of her name burned into her memory. Subject, Amelia. It was like a brand, searing into her soul, erasing everything she thought she knew. I'm not real, she whispered, her voice hollow. I'm just a project. A lie? The guide pulled Marcus back sharply, his tone edged with frustration. We don't have time for pep talks. They're almost here, and if they catch us, this is over. Both of you move.
Now.
The urgency in his voice broke through the fog in Amelia's mind. Her legs finally obeyed, stumbling forward as the guide led them toward a narrow corridor at the back of the room. The walls were lined with cold metal panels, the air thick with an antiseptic staleness that made every breath feel heavier. The dim, flickering lights above seemed to pulse in time with her racing heartbeat. They won't stop, the guide said over his shoulder, his pace quick and deliberate. They don't care if you're alive or dead, as long as the project stays buried. That's why you have to stay ahead of them. Amelia's voice cracked as she struggled to keep up. Why me? Why does it matter so much? What could I possibly know that's worth killing me for? The guide didn't turn around, his focus fixed on the path ahead. It's not what you know. It's what you are. Marcus's head snapped toward him. What does that mean? What is she? The guide stopped abruptly, spinning to face them. His eyes burned with an intensity that made Amelia flinch. She's the only surviving subject. The only one who didn't fail. That makes her both the key and the threat. Amelia shook her head, the weight of his words pressing down on her. What do you mean, fail? What happened to the others? His silence was answer enough. Marcus stepped forward, his anger barely contained. You dragged us into this without telling us the truth. If you want us to trust you, you'd better start talking.
Now.
The guide's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, the distant sound of boots turned into shouting, the echoes bouncing off the metal walls. They were closing in. There's no time, the guide said through gritted teeth, turning and breaking into a sprint. Keep moving, or none of this will matter. Amelia and Marcus had no choice but to follow, the corridor narrowing into a series of twists and turns that seemed to grow darker with every step. The shouts grew louder, closer, until they weren't just echoes. They were real, tangible, right behind them. A gunshot rang out, the sound ricocheting off the walls and making Amelia stumble. Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her forward as her knees threatened to give way. Stay with me, he urged, his voice tight with fear. The guide reached a heavy steel door and slammed his hand against a keypad. Come on, he muttered, his fingers flying over the keys as red lights flashed angrily. Come on, come on. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Amelia turned her head just in time to see shadows spill into the corridor behind them. The figures were close enough that she could hear their rapid footsteps, their breaths heavy with exertion. The guide swore under his breath as the keypad finally turned green. The door hissed open, revealing a staircase that plunged downward into darkness. Go, he barked, shoving Amelia and Marcus inside before slamming the door shut behind them. The staircase spiraled endlessly, each step taking them deeper into the unknown. The air grew colder, heavier, with every descent. Amelia's legs burned, her lungs screaming for relief. But she didn't dare stop.
Not now.
At the bottom of the stairs, the guide pushed open another door, leading them into a vast underground chamber. The space was cavernous, lined with machinery that hummed with a low, menacing rhythm. Screens flickered on the walls, each displaying fragments of data that made no sense to Amelia but seemed to hold the weight of the world in their incomprehensible symbols. What is this place? Marcus asked, his voice echoing in the empty space. The guide didn't answer. Instead, he crossed to one of the screens, his fingers flying across a keyboard as streams of data filled the room. The machinery roared to life, and the chamber vibrated under their feet. This is the only chance we have to find out the truth, the guide said, his voice tight with urgency. But once we start, there's no going back. Amelia stepped forward, her body trembling, her voice barely above a whisper. Then start it. The machinery's roar filled the chamber, the vibrations coursing through Amelia's body as if the truth itself was clawing its way to the surface. On the screens, data streams coalesced into something comprehensible. Images, videos, and files that made her stomach churn. A video began to play. Amelia's breath caught in her throat as she saw herself, or what she thought was herself, strapped to a medical table. She looked younger, her face pale, her expression blank, as if the life had been drained from her. Voices echoed in the recording, clinical, detached. Subject 17 shows unprecedented stability. Unlike the others, her neural responses suggest full integration. What about the risks? If this leaks, it won't. The project will remain classified. Subject 17 is our success. The screen shifted, revealing rows of identical medical pods. Inside each pod, there were people, unmoving, silent. And yet, they all had the same face. Her face. Amelia staggered back, her legs threatening to give way. No, she whispered, shaking her head. That's not possible. Marcus caught her, his voice urgent. Amelia, what does this mean? What are they saying? The guide's voice was grim as he answered. It means you're not who you think you are. You're one of many. Amelia's knees buckled, and Marcus lowered her to the ground, his arms steady around her. No, she said again, her voice trembling. I'm real. I'm me. This can't be true. The guide crouched in front of her, his expression softer now. You are real, Amelia. But you're also the only one who survived. The others couldn't withstand the integration process. Their minds fractured. But you thrived. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at him, her voice breaking. Thrived for what? To be some experiment? To live a life that wasn't even mine? Marcus's voice cut through the tension, sharp and full of anger. Who did this to her? Who's behind all of this? The guide hesitated, his gaze dropping. The same people chasing us now. The ones who funded the project, who saw her and the others as tools. They'll stop at nothing to bury the evidence. On the screens, more videos played, missions, targets, names. Amelia watched herself in each one, emotionless, efficient, a tool wielded by unseen hands. She felt sick, her mind struggling to reconcile the person she saw with the woman she believed herself to be. This isn't my life, she said, her voice barely audible. It was never my life. The guide stepped closer, his tone urgent. But it can be. You're free now, Amelia. They don't control you anymore. That's why they're hunting you, because you're the only one who can expose them. Amelia's gaze snapped to his, a fire igniting in her eyes. Expose them how? By running? Hiding? The guide nodded toward the screen. By using this. The evidence is here. Everything they've done, every life they've destroyed, it's all in this data. But it has to get out. The world has to see it. A pounding on the steel door above shattered the moment. The pursuers had found them. Marcus helped Amelia to her feet, his voice steady. Whatever we're doing, we need to do it now. The guide turned back to the console, his fingers flying over the keys. I'm sending the files to a secure location. But once I do, they'll know. They'll track it. We'll need to hold them off long enough for the upload to finish. Amelia stepped forward, her hands trembling but her voice strong. Tell me what to do. The guide handed her a small device, its screen blinking with a countdown. This will encrypt the data and send it out. Keep it close, no matter what. The pounding on the door grew louder, metal groaning under the strain. Marcus grabbed a makeshift weapon, his jaw clenched. We're not going down without a fight. Amelia clutched the device tightly, her heart pounding. She took a deep breath, her voice steady as she spoke. They took everything from me. My identity, my choices, my life. But they don't get to win. Not this time. The door burst open, armed figures flooding the chamber. Chaos erupted as Marcus and the guide fought to hold them back, the room filled with shouts and the crack of gunfire. Amelia crouched behind the console, the device in her hand beeping steadily as the upload progressed. Time seemed to slow as she watched Marcus, his movements fierce and determined, protecting her with every ounce of strength he had. The guide shouted instructions, his focus unwavering despite the chaos around him. The countdown ticked to its final seconds. Amelia's breath caught as the device beeped one last time, the screen flashing green. The upload was complete. Done, she shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. The guide turned to her, his expression one of relief and urgency.
Go.
Get out of here. Before she could respond, a figure lunged toward her, their weapon raised. Marcus intercepted them, his movements desperate but effective. Run, Amelia, he yelled, his voice raw. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, her heart aching as she looked at him. Then, with every ounce of strength she had left, she turned and ran. The echoes of the battle faded as she disappeared into the dark corridors, the device clutched tightly in her hand. The world would know the truth. And though the cost had been immense, Amelia knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was the beginning of her story, not the end.